Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about wrist stacking on the bench press and using it as a hypertrophy tool. Because, this is something that people will ask about oftentimes. They'll say, hey, I'm not even necessarily chasing the best max bench. Well, you probably should be, but I want to use it to get as big as possible. It's a good growth tool, and it really is. The evidence for that is overwhelming. There are plenty of experts, even on YouTube, who are evidence based guys with plenty of muscle, guys with a good strength base on their pressing and everything else. Everyone from Dr. Mike up to Jeff Nippard. Many years ago, when I did used to watch YouTube Fitness, I heard both of them say that the bench press is arguably the best, or at least in the top three best chest exercises for hypertrophy. And these are experts, and that's kind of the funny thing. You'll get people who argue against the bench for chest size, yet the best experts who are on this platform, at least, who also happen to be bodybuilders, which is not even my cup of tea, will stand there and tell you that it actually is. It's a phenomenal chest hypertrophy exercise, plus front delts, triceps, everything else. It's a good all-around mass builder. But I think part of it, the problem is that people don't understand how to utilize it. They're not understanding that when we start talking about mechanical leverage, mechanical tension on the pectorals, that your stacking and angles and everything do matter. Right? So a lot of times you'll see some things. A lot of times people who struggle to build pecs with it, number one, they don't pin their scapula back. Right? So therefore they are limiting the stretch. And nobody's talking about mechanical tension. They need to stop with that nonsense. Mechanical tension is not even a factor in hypertrophy. All right, there's no evidence for it, which means when it's looked at, since it's not supported by any evidence, it means it probably doesn't matter. It's just something bodybuilders came up with. Right? It's not actually a real thing. Doesn't matter. It probably won't hurt your gains, but it's not going to help them. In other words, it's personal preference. Just what if you want to do it or not. So drop that. So what we're looking at is a mechanical tension. Well, mechanical tension does seem to be, depending upon who you ask, the level of importance ranges from, well, very important, all the way up to the most important factor for hypertrophy. We had to narrow it down to one factor: mechanical tension on the muscle. And when the pec is stretched the most at the bottom, that's when there's the most mechanical tension. Now, I'm not telling you to skip the lockout because of that, okay, because that would be arguing about tension and whatever they call this silly shit. Whatever that term is, I just mentioned it a minute ago. I'm still waking up. I'm drinking some coffee while I do this. But that aside, it's that tension at the bottom. So how do we get the most tension at the bottom? Well, obviously touching the chest is part of it. You'll get people say, but I heard that you shouldn't touch the chest on the bench. Well, don't cry when you tear a pec. Do whatever you want, but I'm not going to support that nonsense. And I've done videos in the past, going back a decade, explaining why that's a problem. But, if you're that worried about it, do a floor press. But you guys notice on the floor press, I can pretty much touch my chest. I'm about an inch away. So I'm still in that peak mechanical tension range. And I think that matters a lot when we're looking at pec building with the floor press or not. How thick are you? But that stretch at the bottom, it's very important. Getting the deepest stretch possible, relative to the weight you're using. So you need to touch. You need to touch. Also, not a bad idea to pause, because now we're having to engage hard from the point of peak mechanical tension where it's highest. Well, the other thing to look at is how do we get the muscles lined up in such a way that we can get the most tension also right there, mechanical tension on the muscle. Notice when I stack my wrists. For me, that's around pinkies on the rings. But notice on all three of these movements, flat bench, incline bench, floor press, what do they all have in common? Should have watched them. Wrists are stacked. My wrists are directly above my elbows at the bottom. Directly above. We're perfectly stacked. All right, we're not bleeding energy all over the place through other joints. What does this mean? That means right at the bottom, the joint that is taking the most is going to be the shoulder joint right there, where the pec is stretched the most. And I'm not saying that's hard on your shoulders, because it's usually not. But that wrist stacking, getting to the point also to where from this front view, you notice that I'm at the bottom, that wrist, I don't just mean left to, front to back stack, it's that left to right, side to side stacking, right there at the bottom. When you see that pause, the wrist is directly above the elbow. Okay, that creates a situation to where we have the most efficient use of the pectoral at the bottom with the greatest mechanical tension. That means that at that point, right there, we have the most available muscle fibers that can be recruited from the pectoral to get the weight started. On top of that, my scapular are pinned back, which puts us into a stretch there. Right? Scapular retracted, pinched together, up on my traps, which again, a small arch, we know activates more pectoral. That's what the data shows. So, scapula pinned back, small arch, wrists perfectly stacked. This is how we get the most tension on the pec at the bottom. Now, that means we have the most hypertrophic potential. For some people, that will be your strongest position too. Not necessarily. The difference being some people just get better lat use and things with a tighter, closer end close grip. Some people can shorten the range of motion so much with a wider grip and use the front delts more to get it moving that it doesn't matter. So they might have a bigger max due to the greatly reduced range of motion. And, again, that might be the case for you. But here's what I'm going to say. That still shouldn't be where you do your building. It's one thing to say, okay, this is where I can lift the most weight, but the other is where we build the most muscle. And if we can build the most muscle there, that's still going to translate over really well when we do that really wide grip. Still do your base building there. In other words, our size raises our strength ceiling. Do your base building at that point. And then if you happen to be stronger for a max with a wider grip, then you can do that. But it's also going to be harder on your shoulder joints and may have less potential for hypertrophy in the pecs. So start looking at your wrist stacking here, guys. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.